This is 20% ballistic gelatin. I've taken a deer shoulder, sawed a slot in the gel. This is just to mimic the skin and basically to keep the arrow in there as it would a deer. Now I know I could be more realistic. Unfortunately, I can't get a deer to volunteer for this test. I could put deer skin over it, but basically I just want to see how the Broadhead behaves, how it penetrates, how it holds together when it penetrates this bone. Hey folks, there are a ton of Broadhead penetration tests out there, but they've all got one major flaw in my opinion. That is, most of them are either shooting through plywood or ballistic gelatin, and it's not real accurate. Now, I'm gonna try to remedy that a little bit, and this is why this is Jones' favorite test that I do, because right there, folks, what do I have in there? I'm like Santa Claus for Jones. I've got a bag of deer shoulders. These are whitetail deer, shoulder blades, scapulas, and as anybody that has bow hunted deer long knows, that this is the #1 killer of what you think is a good shot. If the Broadhead hits that scapula or shoulder bone, a lot of times the arrow can bounce off. Now, I'm not claiming that this test is totally scientific. It, of course, is not. I have neither the time, the budget, nor the know-how to conduct a 100% accurate scientific test. Jones is taking the deer shoulder. Namely, all of these shoulders are a little bit different. All of these came off bucks, but some of them may be bigger, some of them may have bigger bone density. I also may not be able to hit the shoulder bone the exact same way every time. So know that it's not 100% scientific. I'm just trying to solve a few things for myself as a bow hunter, because I too have hit that dreaded shoulder bone. So I want to know, #1, what type of Broadheads penetrate better than the rest? Do cutting points penetrate better or worse than chisel tips that most people think out-penetrate everything? And in my experience, I think I do, but I want to see that. Also, I've written a lot on 125 grain heads versus 100 and even 150 grain heads because of their better penetration, but I want to see that. So to try to compare apples to apples, I'm going to use my 60-pound Hoyt bow here. Now, of course, I'm aware that a lot of people use 65 or 70-pound bows. I'm also aware, though, that a lot of people use 50, 55-pound bows, so I figured this is pretty much an average. I'm going to keep this variable the same. Jones, would you quit eating that deer shoulder? After I shoot a bunch of these, I'm just going to compare, see if I can come up with anything. If it looks like I've hit the bone in a totally different place or something was janky, I'll repeat that test. And then I'm just going to look at my results, and hopefully next season I'll have some actual empirical evidence and some data to give me so I can hunt more effectively. Yo, Jones, give me that bone. I like to call this deer-a-darrow. Olé! This is a 150 grain Wasp sledgehammer. $125 grain Muzzy 1 cutting point. That Muzzy head you could use again. It went straight through the bone right there. Penetrated a good distance, and you can just get a sharpening stone, and it's built to where you can just put both edges on a sharpening stone and sharpen it. This is a 100 grain Spitfire. 125 grain Wasp chisel point. It's NAP hybrid. This is a Gravedigger Extreme. This is a hybrid head that even if catastrophic failure and the blades don't open, it still has a good, just a traditional fixed blade. But then on contact, those open. Now again, you wouldn't think that those would penetrate because of all that width. That's why we're here. And look at that. This is NAP's Thunderhead. Boom. This is G5's Havoc. This is a 100 grain Sever. So obviously I haven't tested nearly all the broadheads, but I've tested some of the same type or category. I can make some light comparisons without testing them all, but occasionally a stunt broadhead comes along, like this Atom that was sent to me by an editor, said try it. It's a chisel point, so I suspect it'll penetrate, but this is a wire. It's got, you know, kind of sharpened wires for blades. The theory is it can bend and go around bones if it had to. I don't know, I'm skeptical because that wire just isn't sharp, and even my surgeon says that you must have sharp blades, razor sharp blades. It creates less trauma, therefore the body, the blood doesn't coagulate. The blood cells are tricked and the wounds don't clot as much, so animals are more likely to bleed out. This is a stunt. We're gonna see the Atom. All right, here's the conclusions to JJ's half-ass penetration test. Can't test every broadhead, I can't test every bow, everything, so I had to test apples to apples at my house the best I could for me, so I know what to use next season. A couple things. Generally, this test was predictable. I've always thought that chisel points, through experience and what people say, chisel points would penetrate better than cutting points. That played out, that happened. Also, as I've written about a ton, the heavier the broadhead, the more it penetrates. Well, predictably, the #1 penetrating head I tested was this 150 grain chisel tip. This is from Wasp. It's a sledgehammer. It was made for penetration. It has a really Muzzy like head that thing is just sharp. It had 16.5 inches hanging out, so that means it penetrated 13.5 inches. Now 13.5 inches, that is right about there. 13.5 of course would go through both lungs on any whitetail in the world, and of course that's a double lung shot, even down and through the scapula like that. So the trade-off is that's a tiny diameter head, so that was predictable in that, you know, this is only a 7/8 inch width. That's a 7/8 inch diameter. So it's 150 grains for max penetration. It's got a chisel tip for max penetration, and it's a very narrow head. So predictably, it won, penetrated 13.5 inches through the scapula. On the other end, predictably, the Gravedigger had the largest cutting swath. That is a massive, that's over 2 inch cutting diameter. It penetrated 6 inches. So through the scapula, and it penetrated approximately that much. Now, would that double lug something? Double lug, it'd be close. You know, a deer's chest cavity is only about 13 to 16 inches deep, so it would be close. The wild card here is nobody knows how this gelatin actually stacks up to a deer's body. Chances are a deer is not as tough as this gelatin. This gelatin is really dense and it really slows things down, even bullets. So I'm guessing that this would penetrate further than 6 inches in a deer, even going through the scapula. So as you can see, there's the trade-off. Do you want the wider head? Because on the wider head, for example, if your shot was off and it wasn't perfect, you missed the lungs by an inch. Well, with this 7/8 inch head, you would whiff, you wouldn't hit lungs. With this 2 inch head, you'd clip an inch of the lungs. So that's the trade-off. There's some though in the middle, not the fastest or not the heaviest or not the lightest, but something in the middle. They tend to perform well if you can get a good quality head. And some of those performers, for example, the Wasp chisel head was 125 grain. It penetrated 11 inches through the bone. That head you could use again. Another good performer, even though it's a cutting tip, the Muzzy 125 grain, this head you could use again. I mean, that still looks great. The good news is all of these heads would have killed a deer. Now, one thing that I gotta mention, we're talking scapula here. The scapula is only about 1/4 inch thick. Most of these heads will penetrate the scapula. That's the, you know, the big shoulder blade if you were shooting down. So you wouldn't have to worry too much. It's this actual shoulder bone that drives away, repels almost all broadheads. I just don't see, you know, that shoulder bone is 2 3/4 inches thick, you're just not going to get through there unless it happens to deflect and goes around. But if you hit something solidly in the shoulder with the bow, it's likely not going to penetrate no matter the head. So if I were you, and what I'm going to do, any of these heads will work if you are more of a going for longer shots and marginal shots, and you want to have a bigger swath as possible. Something like the Spitfire or Gravedigger is great. If you're going for total penetration like on elk, you're confident in your shooting, the smaller diameter chisel points and the heavier heads are better. But if you just want an all-around head, it's tough to beat some of the 125 grains like this Wasp or this Muzzy 1. I'm Jeff Johnston, that's No BS. Happy hunting. Come on, Jones.